Hi, this is John. We're reading Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, and we're jumping right back in. You saw in the last chapter that because edges in a drawing are always shared edges, the objects and the spaces around them fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Every piece is important, both positive forms and negative spaces. Together they fill up all the... Together they fill up all the area within the four edges of the format. Excellent examples of this fitting together of the spaces and shapes are the figure drawing Digger by Vincent van Gogh and the still life painting by Paul Cézanne. Notice how varied and interesting the negative spaces are, how essentially simple they are. And because the spaces are emphasized very strongly in the Van Gogh drawing, especially near the figure and more subtly in the Cézanne, the positive forms are made one or unified with the spaces. Summing up, then, negative spaces have three important functions. 1. Negative spaces make difficult drawing tasks easy. For example, areas of foreshortening or complicated forms that, when flattened on the plane, don't look like what we know about them. These parts of a drawing become easy to draw by shifting to negative spaces because the spaces and the shapes share edges. If you draw one, you have to also draw the other. The chair drawing in the margin and the horns of the sheep on page 113 are good examples. Number 2, emphasis on negative spaces unifies your drawing and strengthens your composition. Emphasis on negative spaces automatically creates unity, and conversely, ignoring negative spaces inevitably disunifies an artwork. For reasons that are hard to put into words, we just like to look at artworks with strong emphasis on negative spaces. Who knows, perhaps it is our human longing to be unified with our world, or perhaps because in reality we are one with the world around us. Number 3, most important, learning to pay attention to negative spaces will enrich and expand your perceptual abilities. You will find yourself intrigued by seeing negative spaces all around you. The next exercise, drawing a chair. Our students are sometimes surprised that the subject chosen for this key exercise is a chair. We tried other subjects, still life objects like fruit and vases, bottles, potted plants, and flowers. But we found that with these subjects, inaccuracies are hard to detect. If the negative spaces of a potted plant are drawn inaccurately, hardly anyone will notice or care. Using a chair as the subject solved the problem. If the negative spaces are incorrect, any inaccuracies quickly show up by distorting the chair, causing both the teacher and the student to notice and to care. In addition, drawing a chair is a great opportunity to experience again our main strategy. Left brain knowledge of chairs must be set aside. A beginner in drawing knows too much, in an L-mode sense, about chairs. For example, seats have been deep enough and wide enough to sit on. All 4 chair legs are about the same length. Chair legs sit on a flat surface. The back of the chair is as wide as the seat, and so forth. This language-based information does not help and in fact greatly hinders drawing a chair. The reason, when a chair is seen from different angles, the visual information does not conform to what we know. Visually, that is, as seen flattened on a plane. A chair seat may appear as a narrow strip, not nearly wide enough to sit on. The curve of the chair's back may appear to be entirely different from what we know it must be. Moreover, the legs may appear to be all of different lengths, and if there are rungs below the chair seat, they form angles, sometimes triangles, when we know the rungs to be parallel to the chair's seat. What are we to do? The answer, don't draw the chair at all. Instead, draw the easy parts, the negative spaces. Why are the negative spaces easier? Because you don't know anything. In a verbal sense about these spaces. You have no pre-existing memorized knowledge of spaces, and therefore you can see them clearly and draw them correctly. And even more important, by focusing on negative spaces, you can cause the L mode again to drop out of the task, perhaps after the usual protest, and again see things clearly. Now, take your plastic picture plane with the clipped-on viewfinder and look at a chair, preferably a chair with rungs and slats. Close one eye and move the viewfinder backwards and forwards, up and down, as though framing a snapshot. When you have found a composition that pleases you, hold the viewfinder very still. Now, keeping one eye closed to flatten the image and gazing at a space in the chair, perhaps the space between the two back slats. Imagine that the chair is magically pulverized and, like Bugs Bunny, disappears, leaving only the negative spaces and the ones you are gazing at, and all the rest of the spaces. They are real. They have real shapes, just like the remains of a door in the Bugs Bunny analogy. Most fortuitously, when you draw the edges of the spaces, those are shaped edges, you will have simultaneously drawn the chair, and the chair will emerge correctly drawn. Note that because the bounding format edge is the outer edge of the chair's negative spaces, and together the chair form and the space shapes fill the format completely, you will end with a strong composition. Art teachers often laboriously try to teach their students the rules of composition, but I have discovered that if students pay close attention to negative spaces in their drawings, many compositional problems are automatically solved. I realize that it is counterintuitive, that is, it goes against common sense to think that focusing on the space within and around objects will improve your drawing of the objects. But this is simply another of the paradoxes of drawing and may help explain why it is so difficult to teach oneself to draw. So many of the strategies of drawing, using negative spaces to make drawing easier, for example, would never occur to anyone in their left mind. Our next bit of preparation is to define the basic unit. What is it, and how does it help with drawing? Choosing a basic unit to start a drawing. On looking at a finished drawing, beginning drawing students often wonder how the artist decided where to start. This is one of the most serious problems that plague students. They ask, after I've decided what to draw, how do I know where to begin? Or what happens if I start too large or too small? Using a basic unit to start a drawing answers both these questions and ensures that you will end with the composition you so carefully chose before you started a drawing. Once, many years ago, when I was teaching a high school drawing class, I asked a student to model by sitting on a chair in side view for the students. It happened that she was wearing some beautiful boots with fanciful designs on the leather, which were in fashion at the time. The class got started with their drawings, and the room went quiet. A half hour later, I heard sighing and a few groans. I asked what the problem was, and one student blurted out, "I can't get to the boots." I walked around the room and saw that almost every student had started the drawing with the head too large and too low in the format. The boots couldn't be included. With the head and upper body so large, the boots went off the page. Though one student just ignored the problem and squeezed the boots up into the drawing anyways, completely distorting the proportions of the model, which we all found very amusing. Even the student who did the distorting. This is such a frequent problem when students are first learning to draw. They almost desperately want to get something down on the paper. Often they just plunge in, drawing some part of the scene in front of them without paying attention to the size of that first shape. In the incident above, the model's head in relation to the size of the format, but the size of the first shape controls the subsequent size of everything in the drawing. If that first shape is inadvertently drawn too small or too large, the resulting drawing may be an entirely different composition from the one you intended at the beginning. Students find this frustrating, causing sighs and groans. because it often happens that the very thing that interests them in the scene, the boots, turns out to be off the edge of the paper. They don't get to draw that part at all simply because the first shape they drew is too large. Conversely, if the first shape is too small, students find that they must include much that is of no interest to them in order to fill out the format. After years of teaching classes and workshops, struggling to find words to explain how to start drawing, my fellow teacher, Brian Baumesler, and I finally worked out a method that enabled us to communicate how a trained artist does this. We had to carefully introspect what we were doing when we started a drawing and then figure out how to teach the process, which is fundamentally nonverbal, extremely rapid, and automatic. We call this method choosing a basic unit. The basic unit becomes the key that unlocks all the relationships between a chosen composition. All proportions are found by comparing anything to a starting shape and basic unit. An anecdote about French artist Henri Matisse illustrates this point and also illustrates the almost subconscious process of finding a basic unit. John Elderfield, former chief curator of painting and sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, in his wonderful catalog of the Matisse retrospective exhibition of 92 states, there is a 1946 film of Matisse painting Young Woman in White. Red background, see figure 7-13. When Matisse saw the slow motion sequence of the film, he said that he felt suddenly naked because he saw how his hand made a strange journey of its own in the air before drawing the model's head. It was not hesitation. Matisse insisted I was unconsciously establishing the relationship between the subject I was about to draw and the size of my paper. Elderfield goes on to say, this can be taken to mean that he had to be aware of the entire area he was composing before he could mark a particular section of it. Clearly, Matisse was finding his starting shape, his basic unit, the head of the model to make sure it would be the right size to show the whole figure in his painting. The curious thing about Matisse's remark is that he felt suddenly naked when he saw himself apparently figuring out how big to make the first shape. I believe this indicates the almost entirely subconscious nature of this process. What is the basic unit? All parts of a composition, negative spaces and positive forms, are locked into a relationship that is bounded by the outside edge of the format. For realistic drawing, the artist is tied to that relationship in which all the parts fit together. The artist is not at liberty to change the proportional relationships, as my high school students did in order to draw the boots. I'm sure you can see that if you change one part, something else necessarily gets changed. Vincent van Gogh's drawing, Van Gogh's Chair, on page 124 will help me explain the use of basic unit. It is the starting shape or starting unit that you choose from within the scene you are viewing through the viewfinder. You need to choose a basic unit of medium size, neither very small nor very large, relative to the format. It can be either a positive form or a negative space. For Van Gogh's Chair, for example, you could choose the top negative space in the back of the chair. A basic unit can be a whole shape, the shape of the model's head, as in two anecdotes above, or a whole negative space, as in Van Gogh's Chair, or it can be just a single edge from point to point, the top edge of that negative space. The choice depends only on what is easiest to see and easiest to use as your basic unit. The next step is to place the first shape into your format. If you imagine crosshairs on the Van Gogh painting, you will easily see where to place that first negative space and what size to make it. Once your basic unit is placed and drawn, all other proportions are determined relative to the basic unit. The basic unit is always called 1. You can lay your pencil down on Vincent's chair to compare all relationships. For example, you can now ask yourself, are all three negative spaces in the chair back the same width? Check it out. Note that for each proportion, you go back to your basic unit to measure it on your pencil, and then you make the comparison with the other negative spaces in the chair back. These measurements are expressed as relationships to 1, or more technically, as ratios. Bullet point. The negative space just below our basic unit is about 1 to 7/8, or 1 7/8. The next space below is about 1 to 3/4, or 1 3/4. Check it yourself by measuring on Van Gogh's painting with your pencil. Notice that these are approximations, not ruler measurements. I'm sure you can see the visual logic of this method and how it will enable you to draw in proportion. Starting with your basic unit, you can draw all the negative spaces in the Van Gogh. Composition, and like magic, you will have also drawn the chair. This method of starting may seem a bit tedious and mechanical at first, but it solves many problems, including problems of starting and of composition, as well as problems of proportional relationships. Soon it becomes quite automatic. In fact, this is the method most experienced artists use, but they do it so rapidly that someone watching would think that an artist just starts drawing after perhaps a slightly beginning pause, as in the Matisse anecdote. Later on, you too will rapidly find a basic unit or starting shape, or your 1, or whatever you may eventually call it. The method becomes very quick and easy with a bit of practice. Later, when you have discarded all your drawing aids, the viewfinders and plastic picture plane, you will use your hands to form a rough viewfinder. Quickly choose a starting shape, a basic unit. Take note of its size and placement relative to the format, and then within your format, size and place the starting shape correctly for your chosen composition. And someone watching you will think you just started drawing. Getting off to a good start, your negative space, drawing of a chair. What you will need: your viewfinder with large opening, your picture plane, your felt tip marker, your masking tape, your pad of drawing paper, your drawing board, your pencil sharpened, your erasers, your graphite stick, and several paper towels or paper napkins. About an hour of uninterrupted time, more if possible, but at least an hour. The general procedure for setting up to draw. You will be taking some preliminary steps, so please read all the instructions before you start. The following is a summary of the preliminary steps for each exercise in this course. The steps take only a few minutes once you have learned the routine. Choose a format and draw it on your paper. Tone your paper if you choose to work on a toned ground. Draw your crosshairs. Compose your drawing using a viewfinder or picture plane. Choose a basic unit. Draw the chosen basic unit on the picture plane with a felt tip marker. Transfer the basic unit to your paper, then start the drawing. Here are the steps for this particular negative space drawing of a chair. The first step is to draw a format on your drawing. Number 1, the first step is to draw a format on your drawing paper for your next negative space drawing of a chair. Use the outside edge of your viewfinder or the plastic picture. Number 2, the second step is to tone your paper. Begin by rubbing the edge of the graphite stick very lightly over the paper, staying inside the format. Once you have covered the paper with a light application of graphite, begin to rub the graphite into the paper with your paper towel. Rub with a circular motion, applying pressure evenly and going right up to the edge of the format. You want to achieve a very smooth, silvery tone. Number 3, lightly draw horizontal and vertical crosshairs on your toned paper. The lines will cross in the center just as they do on your plastic picture plane. Use the crosshairs on the plastic plane to make the position of the crosshairs on the format of your toned paper. A caution: don't make the lines too dark. They are only guidelines, and later you may want to eliminate them. Number 4, Choose a chair to use as the subject of your drawing. Any chair will do. An office chair, a plain straight chair, a stool, a cafeteria chair, whatever. If you prefer, you may find a rocking chair or a bent wood chair or something else very complicated and interesting. But the simplest kind of chair will be fine for your drawing. Place the chair against a fairly plain background, perhaps an empty room corner. A blank wall is just fine and will make a beautiful drawing, but the choice of setting is entirely up to you. A lamp placed nearby may throw a wonderful shadow of the chair on the wall or floor, a shadow that can become part of your composition. Number 6, sit in front of your still life, the chair, and setting you have chosen at a comfortable distance of about 6 to 8 feet. Take the cap off your felt tip marker and place it close beside you. Number 7, use your viewfinder to compose your drawing. Clip the viewfinder onto your picture plane. Then, holding the viewfinder/picture plane up in front of your face, close one eye, and moving the device forward or backwards, up or down, frame the chair in a composition that you like. Many students are very good at this. They seem to have an intuitive feel for composition, possibly stemming from experiences with photography. If you wish, the chair can nearly touch the format so that the chair pretty much fills the space. Or you can leave a bit of space around the chair. Number 8, hold the viewfinder very still. Now, gazing at a space in the chair, perhaps between two back slats, imagine that the chair is magically pulverized and, like Bugs Bunny, disappears. What are left are the negative spaces. They are real. They have real shapes, just like the remains of the door in the analogy. These negative space shapes are what you are going to draw. Choosing a basic unit. 1. Pick up the felt tip marker, still framing your chosen composition with the viewfinder or plastic picture plane. Choose a negative space within the drawing, perhaps a space shape between the two rungs or between two back slats. This space shape should be fairly simple if possible, and neither too small nor too large. You are looking for a manageable unit that you can clearly see for its shape and size. This is your basic unit, your starting shape, your 1. Number 2, with one eye closed, focus on that particular negative space, your basic unit. Keep your eye focused there until it pops into focus as a shape. This always takes a moment. Perhaps it is the L mode protesting time. There is also a little pop of pleasure, perhaps a R mode stepping into the task. Number 3, with your felt tip marker, carefully draw your basic unit on the plastic picture plane. This is your starting shape. Number 4, the next step is to transfer your basic unit onto the paper you have toned. You will use your crosshairs to place it and size it correctly. This is called scaling up. See the sidebar for an explanation. Focus on the negative space you have chosen for your basic unit, then draw that shape on the picture plane. Next, you transfer that shape to your toned paper. Looking at your drawing on the plastic plane, say to yourself, relative to the format and to the crosshairs, where does that edge start? How far over from that side? From the crosshairs? From the top? These assessments will help you draw your basic unit. Draw the edges of the space just as you see them. Simultaneously, of course, you are drawing the edge of the chair. Number 6, one more time, check your drawing of your basic unit. First with the actual chair, then with the rough sketch on the plastic picture plane. And then in your drawing, even though the scale is different in each, the relative proportions and angles will be the same. It is worth taking time to measure your basic unit is correct. This is 7. Once you have this first negative space shape correctly sized and placed within the format of your drawing, all the rest of the drawing will be relationship to that first shape. You will experience the beautiful logic of drawing, and you will end with the composition you so carefully chose at the start. Drawing the rest of the negative spaces of the chair. Number 1, remember to focus only on the shapes of the negative spaces. Try to convince yourself that the chair is gone, pulverized, absent. Only the spaces are real. Try also to avoid talking to yourself or questioning why things are the way they are. For example, why any space shape is the way it is. Draw it just as you see it. Try not to think at all in terms of L-note arguments. Remember that everything you need is right there in front of your eyes, and you need not figure it out. Note also that you can check out any problem area by returning to your plastic picture plane and remembering to close one eye and drawing the troublesome part directly on the plastic plane. Number 2, draw the space of the chair, one after another, working outward from your basic unit. All the spaces and shapes will fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. Number 3, again, if any edge is at any angle, say to yourself, what is that angle compared to vertical or horizontal? Then draw the edge of the angle you see it. Number 4, as you draw, try to take conscious note of what the mental state of drawing feels like. The loss of the sense of time passing, the feeling of locking on to the image, and the wonderful sense of amazement at the beauty of your perceptions. During the process, you will find that the negative spaces will begin to seem interesting in their strangeness and complexity. If you have a problem with any part of the drawing, remind yourself that everything you need to know is right there, perfectly available to you. Number 5, continue working your way through the drawing, searching out relationships, both angles relative to vertical or horizontal, and proportions relative to each other. Remind yourself that the image before you is flattened on the plane. Close one eye as often as necessary. If you talk to yourself at all during the drawing, use only the language of relationships. How wide is the space compared to the one I have just drawn? What is the angle compared to the horizontal? How far does the space extend relative to the whole edge of that format? Soon you will be really drawing, and the drawing will seem like a fascinating puzzle, the parts fitting together in an entirely satisfying way. Number 6, when you have finished drawing the edges of the spaces, you may want to work up the drawing a bit by using your eraser to lighten the tone in some areas, leaving the chair in tone, or erasing the chair and leaving the negative spaces in tone. If you see shadows on the floor or on the wall behind, you may want to add them to your drawing, perhaps adding in some tone with your pencil or erasing the negative spaces of your shadows. You must always want to work up the positive form of the chair itself, adding some of the interior contours. After you have finished, I feel confident that your drawing will please you. One of the most striking characteristics of negative space drawings is that no matter how mundane the subject, a chair, a wire whisk, a stepladder, the drawing will seem beautiful. Don't you agree? For whatever reason, we simply like to look at drawings that give equal emphasis to space and shape, presenting a strong composition and a unified whole image. With only this brief lesson, you will begin to see negative spaces everywhere. My students often regard this as a great and joyful discovery. Have you noticed the negative space arrow on the side of FedEx trucks? Have negative spaces between tall buildings popped into focus? Practice seeking negative spaces as you go through your everyday routine and imagine yourself drawing those beautiful spaces. This mental practice at odd moments is extremely helpful in putting perceptual skills on automatic, ready to be integrated into a learning skill that you own. Showing all manner of negative spaces. Showing all manner of negative spaces. The drawings here on page 132 are intriguingly pleasurable to look at, even when the positive form is as mundane as a basketball net. One could speculate the reason is that the methods raise to a conscious level the unity of positive and negative shapes and spaces. Another reason may be that the technique results in excellent compositions with particularly interesting divisions of shapes and spaces within the format. In the next chapter, we'll take up the perception of relationships, a skill you can put to use in as many directions as your mind can take you. Learning to see clearly through the drawing can surely enhance the capacity to take a clear look at problems and be better able to see things in perspective. A couple images here is Winslow Homer, and this is child seated in a wicker chair. Observe how Winslow Homer used negative spaces in his drawing of a child in a chair. Try copying this drawing. The next one is Peter Paul Rubens, Studies of Arms and Legs. Copy this drawing, turn the original upside down and draw the negative spaces, then turn the drawing right side up and complete the details inside the forms. These so-called difficult foreshortened forms become easy to draw if attention is focused on the spaces around the forms. And that is the end of chapter 7. Thanks for sticking with me. My voice is not great tonight, but get better. Thanks all. See you next time.